I was sitting on the freezing bathroom floor of our flat, staring at two pink lines that seemed to burn straight through every plan I'd ever made. And all I could think was, this was not supposed to happen yet. How you meant to make a decision that could alter the entire shape of your life in a single instant, when only a week earlier you were still telling yourself you had years before you needed to work any of it out. And the worst part was that somewhere deep down, beneath the panic and the shock and the noise in my own head, I couldn't tell whether I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life or walk away from something I would never stop mourning. I wish I could say I reacted properly, that I cried or shouted or dropped the test dramatically into the sink like people do in films. But the truth is far less cinematic. I just sat there, still, numb. The sort of stillness where your body feels completely frozen, but your thoughts are moving so fast they feel dangerous. I remember checking the test again because some ridiculous part of me thought perhaps I'd misread it. 2 lines, sharp, clear, impossible to explain away. I even picked up the box and reread the instructions, as though overnight the meaning of those little lines might somehow have changed. They hadn't. I was pregnant. Even thinking the word felt unreal. Pregnant? That was something that happened to other women. Women who were settled. Women who had planned for it. Women who had Pinterest boards full of nursery ideas and names saved in their notes app, and a proper timeline for how their future was meant to unfold. Not me. I was 28. My fiancé, Daniel, was 29. We were meant to be getting married in September. We had a proper plan, the sort of responsible plan you quietly feel proud of because it makes you look like an adult with a grip on life. We'd talked about children, of course we had, but always in that vague way people do when they feel safe because the subject is still somewhere in the distance. One day, a few years from now, once we'd paid off more of our debt, once work settled down, once we'd had a bit of time to be married first, after everything about our future had that word built into it. And now, all at once, there was no after. There was only now. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember how long I stayed in that bathroom. At some point, I walked back into the hallway and just stood there, staring at absolutely nothing. The flat felt different, as though the walls themselves had shifted while I was in there, as though something had changed without asking my permission. Daniel was in the sitting room. I could hear the telly in the background, some quiz show or football highlights or something equally ordinary. That was the part that struck me hardest. How normal everything still sounded when I felt as though my entire world had just tilted off its axis. I must have looked odd when I walked in because he muted the television straight away. "Love, you all right?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My throat felt tight, as if the words had lodged there and refused to move. So instead, I just held out the test. He looked at it, then at me, then back at it. There was this long, heavy silence while I watched his face try to catch up with what he was seeing. "Is that?" I nodded. Another pause. Longer. "Oh," that was all he said. Just that one word. Not excitement, not panic, not joy, not dread. Just confusion. The same confusion I felt reflected straight back at me. He leaned back a little and ran a hand across his face, and I could almost see the tidy timeline in his head splitting apart the same way mine had. "We weren't trying, were we?" he said, like he needed to hear the facts aloud to make sure reality was still behaving itself. "No," I whispered. "We weren't." Another silence settled between us, thicker this time. I sat down opposite him on the sofa, my hands twisted together so tightly they were beginning to ache. I didn't even realize how hard I was gripping them until much later. "I always thought," I began, then stopped, because I didn't know how to finish the sentence. "I always thought I'd know what to do. I always thought I'd be certain. I always thought this wouldn't happen now." But instead of saying any of that, all that came out was, "I don't know what to do." And the moment I said it, I felt something inside my chest crack open. Because that was the truth of it. Simple and humiliating and raw. He didn't answer at once. He just looked back at the test, as if it might offer him a bit of wisdom if he stared at it long enough. "Yeah," he said quietly after a while. "Neither do I." And somehow that frightened me more than anything else, because in some hidden part of my mind, I think I'd expected him to have an answer, to tell me we'd be fine, or that we weren't ready, or anything definite at all, something solid enough to hold on to. But he looked just as lost as I was. We spent the next hour talking in circles, going over the same things again and again, as though if we repeated them enough times, one of them might transform into clarity. We talked about money, the credit card debt, the wedding, the things we still hadn't done, the life we'd imagined for ourselves, traveling a bit more, progressing in our jobs, having a little time to just be husband and wife before bringing a child into the picture. "We're not ready," I said at one point, barely above a whisper. "Yeah," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. That was when the other thoughts started creeping in. The irrational ones. The ones that had nothing to do with budgets or timing or common sense. "What if we never feel ready?" I asked. He looked at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if this is just what it always feels like? What if people never become fully ready and they just choose it anyway?" He didn't answer straight away, and the silence told me he was thinking the same thing. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling, trying desperately to slow the storm in my head, but it kept building. Fear layered on top of doubt, doubt layered on top of guilt, guilt layered on top of something else I didn't want to name. "I always thought I'd have an abortion if this happened," I said quietly. Saying it aloud felt strange, as though I were speaking for a version of myself who had never actually had to live through this. He nodded slowly. "You've said that before." "I know, but now that it's real," I swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can." The room fell quiet again, because that was the part I hadn't expected. The conflict. On paper, the answer seemed obvious. We weren't financially ready. The timing was all wrong. My career would take a hit. Everything would become more complicated, more expensive, more difficult. But there was this feeling, a quiet voice in the back of my mind that refused to be ignored. What if you regretted? Not regret in some abstract, distant way. Something much more personal than that. What if we wait until we're finally ready and then find out we can't have children? What if this is the moment we're meant to say yes to and we walk away from it? I pressed my hands into my face, trying to shut the thoughts out, but they only came back stronger. "I hate this," I said, and my voice cracked. "I hate that there isn't a clear answer." "Yeah," he said softly. "So do I." We didn't make a decision that night, or the next day, or the day after that. Instead, I existed in a strange in-between state. I went through my routine, went to work, answered emails, replied to messages, picked up groceries, all while carrying this enormous secret inside me. Something that changed everything, even though nothing outwardly had changed yet. Everywhere I went, I felt altered, as if I were carrying something invisible that no one else could see. And in every quiet moment, my mind returned to the same question: keep it or don't? And somehow neither answer felt completely right. The next morning I woke up, and for one tiny second everything felt normal. That fragile little moment when your brain hasn't caught up yet. When you're just lying there, looking at the ceiling, thinking about work and the washing up, and whether you need to stop by Tesco after the office. Then it came back, hard, like a wave crashing over me. I sat up too fast, my heart already hammering, and the first thought in my head was, this is real, not a dream, not a misunderstanding, not something I could undo if I blinked a few more times. I was pregnant, and even the air in the room felt heavier. Daniel was still asleep beside me, breathing slowly and evenly, completely unaware that I was already spiraling again. I watched him for a moment, studying his face like there might be answers in it somewhere. But he looked peaceful, untouched by the storm I was drowning in. I envied him for that. I got out of bed quietly and went straight to the bathroom. I didn't switch on the light at first. I just stood in the dim gray morning coming through the frosted window and stared at my reflection. Nothing looked different. Same face, same body, same life, at least on the outside. But inside, everything had shifted. Without even thinking, I put a hand on my stomach. The gesture was instinctive, automatic. The second I realized what I was doing, I pulled it away as though I'd touched something hot. "What are you doing?" I whispered to myself. That moment frightened me more than anything else, because it meant some part of me was already connecting to this, even if I didn't want to admit it. I turned the bathroom light on, and it felt too harsh, too exposing, as though it was forcing me to look at something I still wasn't ready to face. I needed to think logically, to be practical, to become the version of myself from a week ago. So I did what I always do when I feel out of control. I started turning everything into facts. Fact, we were not financially ready. Fact, we had debt. Fact, we were due to get married in a few months. Fact, a baby would change everything. I stared at myself in the mirror, repeating those points in my head as though they were lines I needed to remember. So what's the sensible choice? I asked my reflection, but the answer didn't come. Instead, another voice slipped in, quieter, softer, more dangerous. But what if this is your only chance? I squeezed my eyes shut. Stop, I muttered. But it didn't stop. What if you wait until the timing is right? And it never happens. What if years from now, you look back at this exact moment and wish with everything in you that you'd chosen differently? What if this is the moment that defines the rest of your life? My chest tightened. Anxiety rose through me again. I gripped the edge of the sink and tried to steady myself. I hated that my own mind was doing this to me, turning everything into a maze of what-ifs with no obvious exit. Because whichever future I imagined, there was grief hiding in it somewhere. Later that day, I went to work and it all felt unreal, like I was performing normality in someone else's life. I smiled when required. I nodded through conversations. I even laughed at something a colleague said, but none of it felt connected to me. All I could think about was that inside me, quietly and invisibly, something was happening, and no one knew. At one point, I found myself staring across the office at a woman from another team. She was visibly pregnant, one hand resting on her bump as she chatted to someone near the printer, smiling like it was the most natural thing in the world. I couldn't stop looking at her. Was that supposed to be me? Had she felt like this in the beginning too? This confusion? This fear? This constant split between logic and emotion? Or had she simply known? Because I didn't know. I felt as though I were standing at a crossroads, without any signs, no map, and no way of seeing what either road actually led to. That night, Daniel and I tried to talk again. We sat at the kitchen table this time, as though a different room might somehow produce a different answer. It didn't. "I've been thinking about it all day," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Me too." He let out a slow breath. "Logically, I still feel like it doesn't make sense right now." I nodded, because on the surface I agreed. "But," he added, and I felt my stomach twist. "But?" He hesitated. "I keep thinking about what you said, about maybe never feeling ready." I looked down at my hands. "Yeah." "And I don't know," he said. "Part of me is scared that if we say no now, we'll regret it later." There it was again. Regret. That word had wound itself around my thoughts so tightly, it felt impossible to pull free. "I'm scared of that too," I admitted. We sat in silence for a moment. "But I'm scared of the other side as well," I said. "What if we keep it, and we're not ready, and it all becomes too much? Money, stress, everything." He nodded. "I know." It felt as though every argument had an equal and opposite argument waiting for it. Every time one path began to make sense, the other one rose up to challenge it. "I wish someone would just tell us what to do," I said quietly. He gave a small, tired laugh. "Wouldn't that be nice?" But no one could. This wasn't the sort of thing you could hand over to somebody else. This was ours, and that made it heavier. "I don't feel ready to be a mum," I said after a while. "Not fully. Not how I thought I would." He looked at me carefully. "Do you think anyone ever feels fully ready?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. "I always imagined I'd be excited," I said. "That I'd feel happy, or at least sure. And I don't feel any of that. I just feel overwhelmed." He reached across the table and took my hand. "I feel overwhelmed too." That helped more than I expected. Knowing I wasn't alone in the confusion, but it didn't make the decision any easier. "Do you think you'd regret it?" he asked suddenly. My heart skipped. "If we didn't keep it?" He nodded. I swallowed. "I think there's a chance I would. Especially if later on we tried and couldn't." He looked down at the table as he processed that. "What about you?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "I think I might regret both choices," he admitted. That hit me harder than I expected, because it was exactly what I felt too. There was no perfect answer, no guarantee, only risk and hope and fear. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I stayed downstairs by myself on the sofa. The flat was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes every thought louder. I curled up under a blanket and replayed everything again and again. Every argument, every possibility, every future I could imagine. In one version, we kept the baby. Our whole life changed. It was difficult, messier than anything we'd planned, and far more overwhelming than we felt capable of handling. But there was something meaningful there too, something real. In the other version, we didn't. We stayed on our original path. We got married, focused on work, built stability, did everything in the right order. And maybe later we had a child when the timing was ideal. But that future always had a shadow attached to it. That question. What if? I closed my eyes. and felt the weight of it pressing down on me. And for the first time, I realized something that tightened my chest in an entirely different way. This wasn't only about timing. It wasn't only about money. It wasn't even only about readiness. It was about who I was and who I wanted to become. And I didn't know the answer yet. The next few days blurred together in a way that felt almost unreal, like I was stuck in a loop. Wake up. Remember. Feel the weight drop into my chest all over again. Go through the motions. Smile when necessary. Answer questions. Act normal. Come home. Think. Think until I felt sick of my own mind. Silence itself started to feel loud. I began Googling things late at night while Daniel slept beside me. Unplanned pregnancy at 28. Not ready but pregnant. Regret after abortion. Regret after keeping baby. I read forum posts, old Mumsnet threads, blog entries, anonymous confessions from strangers who sounded too much like me for comfort. Some women said keeping the baby was the best decision they ever made, even though they'd been terrified at first. Others said they weren't ready, and it changed their lives in ways they never fully recovered from. Some said ending the pregnancy had been absolutely right for them. But then there were quieter voices in the middle, the ones that didn't sound tidy or resolved, the ones that admitted they still wondered. Those were the ones that stayed with me because they sounded like me. One night, I read a post from a woman who wrote, "I don't regret my decision, but sometimes I still think about who they would have been." I stared at that sentence for ages. Who they would have been. There was something about it that wrapped itself around my chest. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was soft and almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Suddenly, this didn't feel abstract anymore. It didn't feel like a problem to solve. It felt like a crossroads with a ghost standing beside one of the roads. I shut my laptop and sat in the dark while my eyes adjusted to the shadows. Then, without thinking, I put my hand on my stomach again. This time I didn't pull it away immediately. I just left it there. And after a while, a thought entered my mind that made my throat tighten. There's already something there. Not something I could see. Not something I could feel physically. But something that existed all the same. That realization didn't make anything simpler. It made everything heavier. The next day, I told one person. I hadn't meant to. In fact, I'd promised myself I wouldn't tell anyone because I didn't want outside opinions shaping my decision. I wanted this to stay between Daniel and me. But I was beginning to feel as though I was carrying too much on my own. So I told my best friend, Emma. We met in a little cafe after work, and I sat opposite her stirring my tea long after the sugar had dissolved. My hands were shaking slightly. I kept glancing over my shoulder like someone might overhear us. Then I just said it. "I'm pregnant." She froze. Her eyes widened, and for a second she said nothing at all. Then she leaned forward. "Are you serious?" I nodded. I watched her face move through 5 different emotions in the space of a few seconds. Surprise, concern, curiosity, and then something softer. "How do you feel?" she asked gently. That question nearly undid me, because I didn't have a neat answer.
"I don't know," I said honestly. "I thought I would. I always thought I'd know exactly what I'd do if this ever happened. But now that it's real, I feel completely lost."
She nodded slowly, like she understood. "Are you thinking of keeping it?"
"I don't know," I said again, and my voice cracked. "That's the problem. I don't know anything."
She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're allowed not to know," she said softly. I let out a shaky breath. Something loosened in my chest for the first time in days. I keep going back and forth, I admitted. One minute I think we're not ready, and this makes no sense, and it would derail everything. Then the next minute I think, what if we never feel ready? What if this is our chance? She tilted her head. That's a very real fear. I know. And I hate that it's part of this. I hate that I can't just decide based on what's practical. Because it isn't only practical, she said. Exactly. That was exactly it. This wasn't maths. There wasn't one correct answer waiting at the end if I followed the right method. This was messy and human and emotional. What does Daniel think? She asked. He's as confused as I am. We both understand both sides. We're both scared of the same things. She nodded. And after a moment she said, All right, let me ask you something. Not what you think you should do. Not what makes the most sense on paper. Just what you feel. I looked at her, my heartbeat quickening. When you imagine your life 5 years from now, she said carefully, which version feels heavier? The question hit me like something physical. Heavier. Not better. Not easier. Not more sensible. Heavier. I looked down at the table because I already knew. I just hadn't said it aloud. If I didn't keep it, I said slowly, choosing every word, I think I'd always wonder. My chest tightened the second I said it. I think I'd always think about what if, who they would have been, what our life would have looked like. She nodded and let me keep talking. And if I did keep it? She asked quietly. I hesitated. I'd be scared, I said, properly scared, about money, timing, all of it. But I don't think I'd wonder in the same way. The silence between us wasn't heavy this time. It was clear. Not easy, but clear. She squeezed my hand again. That sounds like you know more than you think you do. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, and for the first time since I'd seen those 2 pink lines, the chaos in my head quietened, just a little. Not enough to make everything all right, but enough that I could hear something underneath it all, something steady, something that had been there the whole time. When I got home that evening, everything felt different, not lighter, not resolved, but quieter, as though the storm in my head had finally dropped from a scream to a low, constant hum. Daniel was on the sofa again, same as before. Same room, same television, same posture. Yet somehow none of it felt the same. I stood there for a moment just looking at him, because I knew I needed to say something real this time. Not another loop of panic and logic and what-ifs. Something honest. He noticed me and muted the television. You all right? I walked over and sat beside him, my fingers twisting in my lap. I spoke to Emma today, I said. He nodded. Yeah? I told her. He didn't look surprised, just attentive. What did she say? I took a breath. She didn't tell me what to do. She just asked me something. He turned slightly towards me. What? I hesitated. She asked me, when I imagine my life 5 years from now, which version feels heavier? He frowned as he thought about it. Heavier? Yeah, not easier, not smarter, just heavier. He leaned back slightly, already running through it in his own mind. And? I swallowed. I told her that if we didn't keep it, I think I'd always wonder. The words hung there between us. I saw the change in his face straight away. Not shock, not disagreement, recognition. And if we did? He asked. I'd be scared, I said. About all of it. Money, timing, everything. But I don't think I'd carry the same question forever. He looked down at his hands. I've been thinking about that too, he said eventually. I turned to him. Yeah? He nodded slowly.
I keep seeing two futures. In one, everything goes according to plan. We wait, we get married, we're more stable. We do it the right way.
That does sound nice, I said softly.
Yeah, he said. It does.
Then he paused. But there's another version, where we wait until we feel ready, and then maybe it doesn't happen as easily as we assumed.
My chest tightened. I thought about that too. He glanced at me. And I hate that it's part of this. But it is.
We sat in silence again, but it no longer felt like we were trapped. It felt like we were getting somewhere. I'm still scared, he said. Really scared. Me too. I don't feel ready to be a dad. I don't feel ready to be a mom. Another pause. But, he said more quietly, I also don't know if I ever would feel completely ready. That sentence settled between us like a truth we'd been circling for days. Because perhaps there wasn't ever going to be a perfect moment. Perhaps there was never going to be a day when we woke up and felt 100% prepared for something this huge. Maybe this was simply what it felt like, standing on the edge of a life-changing choice with no guarantees. I leaned back against the sofa and looked up at the ceiling again. I wish there were a right answer, I whispered.
Yeah, he said. So do I.
But I don't think there is. He looked at me. I think there's just the answer we choose to live with. That hit something deep inside me because it was true. Not the perfect choice. Not the safe choice. Just the one we would carry with us. I turned and looked at him properly. Do you think we could do it? I asked quietly. His eyes met mine. For a second I saw the fear there. The same fear that lived in me. Honest and raw, but underneath it, there was something else. I think it would be hard, he said. I nodded. I think we'd struggle at times, probably a lot, especially at the start. Yeah, but I also think we'd figure it out. My throat tightened. Together?
A small smile touched his face. Yeah, together.
Something inside my chest shifted. Not certainty, not confidence, but something steadier than either of those, like an anchor lowering into place. I looked down at my hands, then slowly placed one on my stomach. This time I didn't question it. I just let it rest there. And instead of immediate fear, something else rose up. A quiet warmth. Unfamiliar, but real. I think, I said softly, I think I might want this. The moment I said it, my heart started pounding. But not from panic, from the weight of finally admitting what I'd been too frightened to say. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me. Properly looked at me. Yeah? He asked gently. I nodded. I'm still scared, I said quickly.
That part hasn't changed.
Of course. But if we don't do this, I think I'll carry that question forever. He drew in a breath. Then slowly, he nodded too. Okay, he said. Just that. One word. No grand speech. No dramatic promise. But somehow it felt enormous. Because inside that one word, there was agreement. Commitment. The beginning of something neither of us fully understood. I leaned into him and rested my head on his shoulder. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel as though I was falling. I still felt frightened, still uncertain, still aware that our lives were about to change in ways we couldn't fully predict. But underneath all of that, there was direction, a choice, ours. And as I sat there, listening to his heartbeat and feeling my own gradually steady, I realized something that stung behind my eyes. Maybe being ready was never about having everything worked out. Maybe it was just about choosing to step forward anyway. The days after that didn't suddenly become easy. There was no magical shift where the fear vanished and everything became warm and simple and joyful. If anything, the fear stayed, It just changed shape. It became quieter, less frantic, but deeper, like something real had taken root. I remember the first time I said it aloud to myself when I was alone in the car. I'm going to have a baby. The words felt strange in my mouth. Heavy, almost foreign. I said them again, softer this time. I'm going to have a baby. And instead of panic, I felt this rush of emotion rise in my chest that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't pure joy. It wasn't pure fear. It was both, mixed together in a way that made my eyes sting and my throat tighten all at once. I still worried about everything we'd discussed before. The money, the timing, the fact that our neat little plan had been rewritten overnight. None of that disappeared. But those weren't the only thoughts in my head anymore. Now there were new ones, too. Small ones, quiet ones. What would they look like? Would they have his eyes? My laugh? Would we be good parents? Would we get it horribly wrong? I found myself noticing prams in shop windows, baby clothes in supermarket aisles, not stopping to look for long, just noticing. The shift was gradual, so slow I nearly missed it. My mind was moving from should I to what now. Telling our families was another moment I'll never forget. I was terrified, not because I thought they'd be angry, but because saying it aloud to them would make it real in a different way. More public, more solid. We told Daniel's parents first. We sat across from them at their dining table, and my heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands were freezing even though the room was warm. We've got something to tell you, I said, and my voice shook slightly. His mum immediately looked worried. What is it? I glanced at Daniel, and he gave me a tiny nod. I'm pregnant. Silence. For a split second, everything stopped. Then his mum lifted a hand to her mouth. Oh, my word, she said, and her voice caught. At first I couldn't read her face. There were too many emotions moving across it at once. Are you all right? She asked quickly. I nodded. Yeah, we're all right. Just a bit shocked. There was another pause. Then her expression softened, and she smiled. Not a huge, over-the-top reaction. Just warm. Well, she said gently, it may not be the timeline anyone expected, but that doesn't mean it's the wrong thing. Something in my chest loosened. His dad nodded too. We'll work it out. Families do. Those words hit me harder than I expected. We'll work it out. The same thing Daniel had said. The same thing I was starting, slowly, to believe. When we told my parents, the reaction was different. My mum cried at once, actual tears in her eyes before I'd even finished speaking. For one awful second, my heart dropped because I thought I'd disappointed her. I'm sorry, I said quickly. I know it's not exactly... She shook her head and cut me off. No, don't say that. She wiped her face. I'm just overwhelmed. Good overwhelmed? I asked carefully. She laughed through her tears. Yes, good overwhelmed. Then she stood up and hugged me tightly. I know this wasn't planned, she whispered. But that doesn't mean it isn't right. That stayed with me because it said exactly what I've been trying and failing to put into words. Not planned, but not wrong. The weeks passed and everything became more real. Doctor's appointments, conversations about whether to simplify the wedding, budget spreadsheets, talking about what we could cut back on and what mattered and what could wait. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't magical. It wasn't one of those polished pregnancy montages you see online. There were still moments when the fear came creeping back, usually late at night when everything was quiet and my mind had too much room to roam. What if we can't cope? What if we struggle more than we expect? What if this changes us in ways we don't recognize? But there were other moments, too. Moments when I caught myself smiling without meaning to. Moments when Daniel would say things like, "Do you reckon they'll like football?" Or, "Imagine if they inherit your stubbornness." And instead of panic, I'd feel something warm spread slowly through my chest. Hope. Not loud, not dazzling. Just steady. There was one night in particular I still think about. We were lying in bed with the room dim and quiet, apart from the soft hum of the fan. I was on my back staring at the ceiling again, something I'd done so much during those first awful days. Only this time, it felt different. Daniel turned his head slightly. "What are you thinking about?"
I smiled faintly.
"Everything."
He gave a soft laugh. Good everything or overwhelming everything?
A bit of both. He reached over and put his hand gently on my stomach. Such a small thing, but it made my breath catch. Because this time, I didn't feel afraid when he did it. I just felt present. "This is really happening," he said quietly. "Yeah," I whispered. We lay there like that for a while, without saying anything else. And in that silence, I realized something that finally brought me a kind of peace I hadn't felt since the beginning. The fear hadn't disappeared. The uncertainty was still there, but it no longer controlled me, because now it stood beside something else, something stronger. Choice. We had chosen this, not because it was simple, not because it was perfect, but because in the middle of all the confusion, this was the path that felt possible to live with. The path that didn't leave us staring backwards for the rest of our lives. Even now, I still don't have all the answers. I still don't know exactly what sort of parents we'll be. I still worry about the future more often than I'd like to admit. But I've stopped chasing certainty because I don't think certainty exists. I think there is only the life you choose and the courage it takes to step into it. I'm still trying to make sense of all of it. And I still have moments where I stop and think about how differently everything could have gone. If you'd been in my position, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments, and if you want to hear more about how this journey unfolds, subscribe and stay with me.